The story begins with a seemingly perfect picture of family and success, centered around Malik Robinson, a charming and ambitious young man in his early 30s. Malik grew up in Harlem, raised by his single mother, Lorraine Robinson, a woman who dedicated her life to ensuring that her son had everything he needed to succeed. Lorraine, now in her 50s, was tough, resourceful, and proud of the fact that she had clawed her way up from poverty to give Malik the opportunities she never had. For her, Malik was not just her son, he was her pride, her world, and the proof that all her sacrifices had been worth it. Lorraine had faced hardship her whole life, but nothing mattered as much to her as Malik. As a young woman, she had been involved in some unsavory dealings, including ties to a criminal network in the city, but she had managed to bury that past. She worked menial jobs, saved every penny, and poured all her energy into Malik's future, ensuring he got the best education possible. By the time he was in his 20s, Malik had earned a full scholarship to a prestigious business school, and after graduating, went on to start his own successful real estate firm. For Lorraine, Malik's success was her greatest achievement. She saw herself as the architect of his life, the driving force behind his rise to wealth and status. She had molded him into the man he was, and she couldn't imagine her life without him. In her eyes, no woman could ever be good enough for Malik, certainly not one who would take him away from her. Despite her overprotectiveness, Malik adored his mother. He appreciated everything Lorraine had done for him and often described her as the strongest person he knew. But while he deeply loved her, he also felt the weight of her expectations. Lorraine was always involved in his life, controlling in subtle ways, and making sure that he never strayed too far from her grasp. Malik was her success story, and she wanted to remain at the center of it. Their dynamic had always been complex, but it became even more strained when Malik met Chantel Banks. Chantel was everything Lorraine feared. An independent, confident, and beautiful woman who had the power to take Malik away from her. And that's exactly what happened. Chantel was a 28-year-old social media influencer and entrepreneur who had built a strong following through her beauty tutorials, fashion sense, and empowering messages about overcoming hardship. Raised by a single mother in the Bronx, Chantel understood struggle, but had managed to transform her life through hard work and determination. With her striking looks and sharp mind, she quickly climbed the ranks of social media fame, amassing a loyal following and using her platform to inspire others. When Malik and Chantel met at a charity event, there was an instant connection. Malik was captivated by Chantel's beauty, intelligence, and ambition. She was different from the women he had dated before. She had her own success, her own drive, and she wasn't afraid to challenge him intellectually. They quickly fell in love, and within a year, Malik proposed. Chantel accepted, and the couple began planning their wedding, excited to start their life together. To anyone looking from the outside, Malik and Chantel were the perfect couple. They were young, attractive, successful, and deeply in love. Their engagement was celebrated in the media, with photos of them gracing the pages of society magazines and blogs. Friends and family congratulated them, and their love story became the stuff of fairy tales. But behind the scenes, trouble was brewing. Lorraine, from the very start, was unhappy about Malik's relationship with Chantel. She saw Chantel as a threat, a woman who was not only going to take Malik away from her, but who might not be worthy of him. Lorraine was fiercely protective of her son, and though she tried to hide it, she resented Chantel's presence in his life. The idea of Malik marrying another woman filled her with dread. She had spent decades raising him, making him the man he was, and now it seemed as if someone else would reap the benefits of all her hard work. For Lorraine, the engagement was more than just Malik's decision to marry. It felt like a betrayal. She had always imagined being at the center of Malik's world, even as he built his own life. But Chantel represented something she could not control. The wedding would mean that Malik would be leaving her behind in a way that felt permanent. Initially, Lorraine's discontent was subtle. She made comments here and there, questioning Chantel's background and whether she was truly the right fit for Malik. She mentioned Chantel's social media presence in a way that seemed condescending, implying that her career as an influencer was shallow compared to Malik's serious business achievements. Lorraine even expressed doubts about how well Chantel would fit into their family, suggesting that she lacked the values Lorraine had instilled in Malik. Malik tried to brush off his mother's concerns, believing that Lorraine would come around in time. He knew his mother could be overbearing, but he hoped she would eventually accept Chantel and realize how happy they were together. But the tension only grew as the wedding date approached. Lorraine's jealousy and paranoia began to consume her. She saw Chantel as someone who didn't deserve Malik, a woman whose success was built on vanity and social media followers rather than hard work and sacrifice. In Lorraine's eyes, Chantel was shallow, unworthy, and most dangerously capable of taking Malik away from her for good. As Lorraine's disapproval turned into obsession, she started digging into Chantel's past. She spent hours online, searching for anything that would discredit Chantel in Malik's eyes. It wasn't long before she found something that Lorraine believed would be her trump card. In her younger years, long before she became an influencer, Chantel had dabbled in adult content on a platform like OnlyFans, using a pseudonym to protect her identity. It was a brief chapter in her life, one she had left behind as she built her brand and her career. But now it was resurfacing in the worst possible way. Lorraine was thrilled when she uncovered Chantel's secret. She believed she had found the evidence she needed to prove to Malik that Chantel wasn't the woman he thought she was. Lorraine was convinced that once Malik knew the truth, he would call off the wedding and realize that his mother had been right all along. She planned to confront Malik with this information in the days leading up to the wedding, certain that it would tear their relationship apart. However, the situation was more complicated than Lorraine realized. Chantel's secret wasn't just a stain on her character. It was tied to a darker, more dangerous past. As Lorraine continued her investigation, she discovered that Chantel's family had connections to the same criminal network Lorraine had once been involved with. The very organization Lorraine had escaped years ago. This discovery sent Lorraine spiraling into paranoia. She no longer saw Chantel as just a threat to her relationship with Malik. She began to believe that Chantel's presence in their lives was part of a larger conspiracy, a plot to expose Lorraine's own dark past. In Lorraine's fractured mind, Chantel's marriage to Malik wasn't just a personal affront, it was a danger to her very survival. As the wedding day approached, Lorraine's obsession turned into madness. She convinced herself that the only way to protect Malik and herself was to stop the wedding at any cost. What started as a mother's overprotective instinct had morphed into something far more dangerous, setting the stage for a tragedy that no one could have predicted. In the backdrop of this twisted family dynamic, the day of the wedding loomed large. Everyone believed they were about to witness a beautiful union of love, but beneath the surface, Lorraine was planning something far darker, a decision that would change all their lives forever. Chantel Banks entered Malik's life like a burst of sunlight, bringing warmth and excitement that he hadn't felt in a long time. Tall and confident, Chantel's presence turned heads wherever she went. She had a radiant smile, caramel skin that glowed in any light, and long, flowing black hair that framed her striking features. But what truly captured Malik's heart was her spirit, her resilience, intelligence, and her ability to lift people up with her energy. Chantel was more than just a pretty face. As a popular social media influencer, she had built her brand on beauty tutorials, fashion, and motivational content. Her followers admired her for her authenticity, her candidness about her difficult upbringing, and the way she used her platform to inspire others. But behind the glitz and glamour of her online persona, Chantel harbored a secret past, one she never shared with Malik out of fear of losing him. Several years before meeting Malik, Chantel had faced financial hardship. Raised by a single mother in Harlem with a father who had been absent her entire life, Chantel had learned to survive by any means necessary. At her lowest point, she turned to creating adult content on OnlyFans, using a pseudonym to keep her identity hidden. It was a way to make quick money, but one that weighed on her conscience. Once she gained financial stability and her social media career took off, she left that world behind, deleting her accounts and erasing every trace she could. However, The fear of her past resurfacing haunted her. When Malik and Chantel met, it was love at first sight. Malik admired her drive, her independence, and her beauty. He had never met anyone like her before, someone who not only challenged him intellectually, but also understood the struggles of rising above humble beginnings. Their relationship grew quickly, and within a year, Malik proposed. Chantel accepted, and they began planning their future together, excited for the life ahead. But not everyone was happy about their engagement. From the moment Lorraine Robinson, Malik's mother, met Chantel, she despised her. To Lorraine, Chantel represented everything she feared. Someone who could take Malik away from her. Chantel's confidence, independence, and beauty were perceived as threats. Lorraine saw Malik as her possession, her life's work, and the idea of another woman taking him from her was unbearable. Despite her outward politeness, Lorraine harbored a deep hatred for Chantel. She made subtle jabs at her character, questioning her background and whether she was truly worthy of Malik. But it wasn't until Lorraine began obsessively digging into Chantel's past that she discovered the dark secret Chantel had been hiding. Lorraine found old, archived content from Chantel's deleted OnlyFans account. But the revelation of Chantel's adult work wasn't the most shocking discovery. As Lorraine delved deeper, she uncovered something even darker. Chantel's family had past ties to a notorious sex trafficking ring, the same criminal organization Lorraine herself had been involved with decades earlier. Lorraine had escaped prosecution through bribes and intimidation, burying her involvement deep in the past. Now, she believed Chantel's presence in Malik's life wasn't a coincidence. In her twisted mind, Chantel was a threat sent to expose Lorraine's past and destroy everything she had built. This discovery pushed Lorraine further into paranoia, and her hatred for Chantel turned from jealousy to fear. She became convinced that Chantel's marriage to Malik would lead to her own ruin. As Malik and Chantel's wedding day approached, Lorraine knew she had to act, and fast. As the wedding date drew closer, the tension between Lorraine and Chantel escalated. Chantel tried her best to ignore Lorraine's thinly veiled hostility, focusing on her love for Malik and the life they were about to build together. But Lorraine's passive-aggressive remarks and cold stares grew more frequent, creating an undercurrent of unease. Chantel often vented to Malik, expressing her frustration with his mother's behavior. Malik, caught between the two women in his life, tried to keep the peace. He was aware of his mother's overbearing nature, but he still loved her. He dismissed her behavior as overprotectiveness, unaware of the depth of Lorraine's resentment. Lorraine, on the other hand, was unraveling. The more she thought about Chantel, the more she saw her as a threat, not just to her relationship with Malik, but to her very existence. She spent hours obsessively scrolling through Chantel's old social media posts, piecing together fragments of her past. In her increasingly paranoid mind, she believed Chantel was part of a grand conspiracy to expose her criminal history. The nights before the wedding, Lorraine barely slept. She wandered her apartment, rehearsing conversations in her head, how she would confront Malik, how she would reveal Chantel's sordid past. But each scenario ended the same way. Malik would leave her, Chantel would win, and Lorraine would be left alone, exposed to the world. The weight of it all became too much. Lorraine was no longer thinking rationally. She began to believe that the only way to save Malik from Chantel and protect her own secrets was to remove Chantel from their lives permanently. By the morning of Malik and Chantel's wedding, Lorraine had reached the breaking point. She no longer saw Chantel as just an obstacle in her relationship with Malik. In her twisted mind, Chantel had become the enemy, a woman who would not only take Malik away from her, but also ruin her life by exposing her dark past. The wedding was held at a grand cathedral in Brooklyn, a beautiful venue that had been painstakingly decorated with flowers, candles, and delicate lace. The air was filled with excitement as friends and family gathered to witness the union of Malik and Chantel. Everything seemed perfect, but beneath the surface, Lorraine's madness was about to boil over. Dressed in an extravagant black gown, an ominous choice for a wedding, Lorraine arrived at the church. Her eyes darted around the room, fixating on Chantel as she prepared for her walk down the aisle. To Lorraine, the sight of Chantel in a white wedding dress was unbearable. In her delusional state, she saw it as an affront, a symbol of purity that Chantal didn't deserve. While everyone was busy with last-minute preparations, Lorraine slipped away to the kitchen, where the massive wedding cake was waiting to be brought out. Her eyes landed on a gleaming cake knife resting on the table. The metal felt cold in her hand, grounding her in the moment. She slipped the knife under her gown and returned to the church, her mind racing with thoughts of what she was about to do. As Malik waited at the altar, heart pounding with anticipation, the bridal march began to play. Chantal appeared at the entrance, radiant in her gown, her face glowing with happiness. But Lorraine saw none of that. All she could see was her future slipping away, her son being stolen by a woman she despised. As Chantal walked down the aisle, Lorraine made her move. The priest's voice rang out over the gathered guests. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. At that moment, Lorraine stood up, her face twisted with rage. I object, she screamed, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. Gasps rippled through the church as all eyes turned toward her. Malik's heart sank. He turned to his mother, confused and horrified. Mom, what are you doing? But Lorraine was no longer in control of her actions. Her eyes locked on Chantal, who stood frozen at the altar, fear creeping into her expression. You don't deserve him, Lorraine shrieked. You're a liar, a whore. You're not taking him from me. Before anyone could react, Lorraine pulled the knife from beneath her gown and lunged at Chantal. Screams filled the church as Lorraine slashed at Chantal's chest, the blade tearing through the delicate fabric of her wedding dress. Blood splattered across the floor as Lorraine stabbed her again and again, each strike fueled by years of resentment, fear, and obsession. Malik, paralyzed by shock, watched in horror as his mother brutally attacked the woman he loved. He couldn't move, couldn't process what was happening. Chantal's screams echoed in his ears, but it was as if the world had slowed down around him. By the time guests rushed forward to pull Lorraine away, it was too late. Chantal collapsed to the floor, her white gown soaked in blood, her eyes wide and unseeing. Lorraine, her face smeared with blood, stood over Chantal's body, breathing heavily. Her eyes were wild, her mind fractured beyond repair. She whispered, I did it for you, Malik. We're free. The aftermath of the tragedy leaves both families and the community in shock. Malik's murder during his wedding stuns everyone, as what should have been the happiest day of his life becomes a nightmare. Lorraine, once seen as a loving, devoted mother, now faces arrest and prosecution for her son's brutal death. The police arrive at the scene, where Lorraine is found in a dazed state, covered in blood, with the weapon nearby. Her unhinged rantings about protecting Malik from Chantal paint a disturbing picture of her mental unraveling. As the investigation unfolds, Lorraine's past involvement with criminal activities comes to light, adding to the public intrigue surrounding the case. The media pounces on the story, dubbing it the wedding day murder, sensationalizing every detail. The trial becomes a high-profile event, with courtrooms packed and news outlets following every twist and turn. Public sentiment is divided, with some portraying Lorraine as a victim of her own mental instability, while others see her as a calculating murderer who destroyed her own son's life in a fit of possessive rage. During the trial, Lorraine's defense hinges on her mental state. Her lawyers argue that she had a psychotic break, driven by fear for her son and paranoia about Chantal's past, which they frame as the trigger for Lorraine's collapse. They emphasize Lorraine's history of trauma and sacrifices, painting her as a woman who lost her grip on reality, acting out of a distorted sense of love and protection. The prosecution, however, counters by portraying Lorraine as a controlling and obsessive mother who couldn't accept losing her son to another woman. They argue that Lorraine knew exactly what she was doing, meticulously planning her attack out of jealousy and an inability to let Malik go. Chantal, devastated and still in shock, testifies about the mounting tension between her and Lorraine, sharing how Lorraine's possessiveness had escalated over time. Her emotional testimony becomes a turning point in the trial, as the jury sees the impact Lorraine's actions had not just on Malik, but on Chantal's life as well. As the trial nears its conclusion, the jury must decide whether Lorraine is guilty of first-degree murder or if her actions were the result of temporary insanity. The trial's emotional weight leaves everyone involved deeply affected. particularly Chantal, who now carries the weight of both her lost love and the public scrutiny of her past. Ultimately, Lorraine is found guilty of murder, but receives a reduced sentence due to her mental state. She is sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility rather than a traditional prison, where she spends her days replaying her actions, haunted by the reality of what she's done. In the years that follow, the tragedy lingers like a shadow over everyone's lives. Chantal, though deeply wounded, eventually tries to rebuild her life, forever marked by the loss of Moloch and the horrifying events of their wedding day. For Lorraine, the punishment is not just her confinement, but the knowledge that her obsessive love destroyed the very thing she cherished most, her son.